and welcome to the Business of Data podcast. I'm your host, Catherine King, and it's a pleasure to have you join us today. In this series, we'll be speaking to senior data analytics leaders to share their experiences, challenges, and insights. Let's go ahead and dive straight into today's episode. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of the Business of Data podcast. Today we're going to be diving into the depths of data culture and data management and the relationship between the two. And to dive into this fantastic topic, we thought we'd bring in Laura Hahn, who is the Director of Enterprise Data Management from TD Ameritrade. So, to give a bit of an introduction to Laura, she has over 2 decades of experience in data management, roles in companies including Target, US Bank, KPMG, just to name a few. As TD Ameritrade's Director of Enterprise Data Management, she leads a 30-strong team and oversees a risk-based governance program. She's also launched a client master data management platform to drive data centricity at the financial service company. Now, Laura also believes strongly that leading with empathy, curiosity, transparency, and empowerment helps to get the very best of her colleagues and professional relationships. Wowee, what an introduction. Hi there, Laura.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, as is the theme with all of my podcast episodes, I like to dive in with a bit of a nosy question first. And my question for you is, when I was browsing on your LinkedIn earlier, I noticed that you had right there at the start of your bio that you believe in leading with that empathy, curiosity, transparency, and empowerment. Now, did you have a mentor that had a similar leadership style that you thought, yeah, that's the right way to do it? Or did you arrive at this approach via some other route?
Yeah, that's a great question. I recently did a lot of thinking about this to write that statement. And I would say it's a combination of experiences with different leaders, a personal exploration of what my voice is, and then some experimentation. And so through all of that, I really identified what feels authentic as my brand, and has also resonated with my team and others. So it's a process.
Absolutely. And it's certainly been something that I've heard quite a lot in the recent times where emotions are so high, stress levels are up, no matter what industry we're talking about. COVID has certainly brought about a very different type of work environment for many people. So actually leading with empathy now, I think, is more prominent than ever before, because you're not only having to think about people's work life, but also family, friends, health, and all of those combinations. So I think you're on the path to success already by leading in that way. Awesome. Let's get into the meat and bones of it then. So you have achieved a great deal over the course of your 6-year tenure at TD Ameritrade, I think it's fair to say. Would you please start by telling me a bit about the company's data management journey that you have been on and that you've seen?
Absolutely. Journey is a great way to describe it. It's got a lot of twists and turns. It started about 8 years ago when our COO at the time initiated a real investment in data capabilities, and wanted to bring in a whole host of things around big data, data science, data governance, quality. We all know the list, right? All those capabilities. And I think what the first stage of the journey taught us is it's challenging to, right out of the gate, launch all of those at the same time. And I think every aspect, every corner of those data capabilities had to go through, I would say, 2 to 3 cycles of iteration, making sure they were really attached to the company's use cases, that we were staffed and selecting the right products, and that we were building up relationships with stakeholders. So, we started 8 years ago, but you see some reincarnation of things during that time as we tried and failed and tried again and failed and tried again. But the failure always teaches you something, right? And so I would say, we see a lot of those capabilities much more mature and instantiated now. That I think it's a bit different for each one. If you take our big data platform, we sort of finally figured out where it's appropriate to use that. When you look at data science, AI, ML, we finally hit on use cases that work best for us.
Right.
And then, mainly for me in the past year for data governance, how do we actually operate a successful data governance program? And they all are applied in different ways now. It's not one big centralized initiative. Each one has had to find its way.
So how did you then, so you've hit the nail perfectly on the head. You had so much that you wanted to do. You come in full of passion. How do you then go by listing off what one you want to focus on first, and then second? That priority order must have been quite challenging to do, because you want to run at it full pace, you want to get it all done, but that's just not practical. So what did you do to prioritize those capabilities?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, and you'll probably hear this theme throughout the conversation, you really have to understand what problems your business wants to solve, and then match that up with the data management capability that is most correlated to solving that problem, and then bring that solution to the table. So I think, for example, data science and advanced analytics found some footing very early on. And there was a lot of interest in that, right? Everybody wants all that those juicy insights. Something like, I would say, a data catalog, right, is something that's happened much more recently. That one took a lot longer because it feels like documentation, right?
Yeah.
I would say sexier tends to get started sooner.
I'm glad you said it, because that's exactly what I was thinking about. That it's always the shiny, sexy things, and the more kind of mundane, and the ones that make you go a bit like, oh yeah, we've got to do it, but I'm not sure it wants to be the top of my list.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would say the sexy scale is a great prioritization mechanism. That's maybe strange, but I think it is all about the appetite in your company to adopt those capabilities and bring them into the norms of the firm, and participate and engage with those capabilities. And it will depend on the value that they see in them. And so if you can lay that out ahead of time, that's great. It gives you a bit of a roadmap. Sometimes you can stand them all up, but you just may not be as active in some as you are in others.
Absolutely. And I love that for you, that business value is right at the start of that conversation, as opposed to kind of assessing it from your own perspective in data, and then going, how can we match this to business? It's actually taking both of those in the same conversation right at the start to make sure you're completely aligned. I think that's fantastic. Now, on that point of on culture, how crucial do you think it is to have a positive data and technology culture in an organization?
It's essential. I've been part of both data and technology transformations, and the real key, I think the real barrier that is pretty common to get over first is building trust. The business has to trust that your technology or your data organization is going to deliver for you. It's like they're going to place a bet on you, right? I'm going to become dependent on you to help me. And so you have to build that trust, whether it's you're going to deliver me the technical solutions I need, or you're going to give me the data that I need, or fix or manage the data that I'm dependent on. So given how pretty much any industry is becoming tech-driven and digital, no one can really do a job without data and technology anymore. And so if there are some fundamental trust issues or brokenness in those relationships, it's going to show up in the culture of the company, and ultimately, I think, in the results of the company. So absolutely critical.
Absolutely. And I think, as you've said there, being data driven is almost taken for granted now, because it's just the assumption that all organizations and enterprises should be. But as you say, if there is that distrust in the teams, the processes, the data itself, if you see headlines about, dirty data, and, and then you look further down the lines at capabilities with machine learning and AI, and, having those thoughts and feelings about data can really impact then the work that you're actually able to do with it, because if you don't trust it, chances are you're not going to go full into what you can do. So let's take a bit of a step back and look at the kind of maturity scale. how mature would you say the organization is with their data culture now compared to when you first joined the company? If you could kind of just talk through that journey.
Well, this is there are so many aspects of data culture. So I think obviously when I first joined, the company was in a similar place as many companies, right? I would describe it as low maturity, but very high on aspiration.
Okay.
And a lot of interest. And so it's grown, I would say, through three things. One is the macro environment influence. And I think many companies are influenced, right? You see your competitors becoming data-driven, so you want to be data-driven too, right? You don't want to get caught on your back foot not making advances in this space, even if you're not sure what it is. You can see that everyone's doing it. Second, I think when leadership changes in a company and you bring in leaders who've had some experience with being in a data-driven culture, they bring that with them, right? And they start to expect that of their team.
Mm-hmm.
So not that we had more turnover than anybody else, but just sometimes new people bringing new perspectives starts to change the dynamic.
Yeah.
And then third, we saw a lot of teams really hire a lot of people who were data savvy. And so that also creates, I would say, kind of a bottoms up shift in a culture when individuals talking to individuals are talking in a data-centric way. And so those are all dynamics that don't necessarily come from an enterprise data management team in an official culture change.
Yeah.
But those factors certainly help. And then, obviously, our role is to really teach the firm how to behave with data. And so those things all coming together have really lifted our maturity as a result of our efforts, but also just the changing company environment and then our macroeconomic climate.
I think what I love about data culture, whenever I have conversations about culture, is it's so subtle. It's conceptual. You can't touch it, but the minute you walk into an enterprise that is data driven, you can feel it. There's things you can identify. There's dashboards. People can understand. There's a level of literacy and like we said in the beginning, trust as well. But as you say, just hiring talent that have a level of data literacy and have that expectation, as well as the executive board as well. You're generating that culture without necessarily thinking about it, maybe consciously, but it's in the background kind of working away. So I'm keen to know, you mentioned there about having executives come in and kind of leading with a data-driven approach. What would be your advice to someone who's perhaps under an executive who isn't as data-driven? What would be your kind of advice to help them on their way of developing a data culture?
Well, I think I think about it as converting aspiration to reality, and understanding what's important to that leader and that team, and then illustrating for them how data is the answer or is part of the answer to whatever problem they want to solve or whatever initiative they want to be successful. And so you have to really put it in their terms. You have to translate data capabilities into the language that they understand. It's sort of like, if you have a pet or if you have a dog, you take the medicine and you put it in the peanut butter. You have to sort of tuck it in. Mm-hmm. I think where I've seen challenges with trying to convince leadership is staying in our data management jargon. And selling things in our jargon the way we talk to each other as data professionals. Right. If you're not speaking their language, then they won't see the connection between, they think you're just kind of retrofitting your solution to their problem.
Right.
You have to lead with their problem and say, well, I think we can deliver X, Y, and Z. And they may not realize behind the scenes that those are really data solutions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thinking culture, thinking in the same way that we were talking about you as a collaborative person. Now, you, as we said in the introduction, have been involved in many boards and committees over the last few years. What is it about working in this cohesive and collaborative way that you believe is very important to an organization and to your teams?
Yeah, I would say two things. One thing that I've heard at multiple companies, and where we often find ourselves as data management professionals, is sitting in an enterprise chair. And I think most companies struggle to do things that are enterprise because
Right.
everyone owns it, which sometimes means no one owns it. And so you have to find a way to create some functional structure around that. So if you want to do things enterprise, you have to get comfortable with this type of working. The second thing to me is that collaboration is sort of like, I've been thinking a lot about this lately in different styles of leadership, that collaborative leadership is more like having people sitting around a circular table where everyone is coming in with sort of an equivalent level of power influence, instead of what I think of as like a rectangular table, right? Where there's like a leader at one end.
Yeah.
And so it can be sort of uncomfortable for people to have to be either elevated to this level of equality at the table, or they're accustomed to being in the position of power at the table. But I find that what it does is pull in all the voices that you really need. If you're going to solve something that's previously been unsolvable, it's usually because there's a voice that was missing. And so the circular table makes sure all those voices get heard and the answer or solution is ultimately workable for everybody.
I absolutely love that. And just from that, how have you found, because I'm assuming you have at some point been remote based over the last few months, how has that collaboration translated to online and digital? Because I'm imagining when you're saying circular table, I'm literally imagining you guys sat down in an office and being very collaborative. Is that the case, that that's how it was, or were you, fairly dispersed anyway?
We were really dispersed. TD Ameritrade has several corporate locations. So we were already doing a lot of things with WebEx. We just live and breathe WebEx, and we were like that previously. So in that regard, I think we've just leaned in even more to those tools. We certainly miss some of the relationship building and just interpersonal interaction that helps you understand people, or some of those side conversations where you really get insight into what people care about. That part I definitely miss. But for the most part, it's been about as smooth as you could hope for in this environment.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great key learning, though, that this sort of collaborative work and, kind of thinking board and committee work can still occur in these turbulent times. And it's certainly not a time to be pushing that to the side, and actually probably a time to be increasing that level, because as you said quite rightly, it's a case of working through challenges that you perhaps haven't been able to before. And with challenges coming left, right and centre at the moment, that sounds like a great method of working through those. Now, I'm keen to move the conversation forward. Now, I really would love to know about this client's master data management platform. How does it help your team to dive deeper into client centricity and support the business with total relationship views?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is another one that's been a journey. We've tried this a couple of times. And for us, the roots of it really lie in our business model. So our business is brokerage, right? People come to TD Ameritrade, they open an account, they put money in it, and then they transact. And they're managing their financial life. And so, so what client is to us is, as clients open that second account or third account, or help family members with their accounts, you start to get a view into how they're managing their money across multiple accounts. And so the journey for us has been about moving from account centricity, right, servicing at the account level, to really understanding the client and all of the money that they have some sort of responsibility for, and what their overall goals are for their accounts. And then also a layer above client, which we would call household, because that's, again, how most of us manage our money. We're part of a family unit or a part of a community where we're managing money. And so, so our MDM journey was really about extracting insights from that account base and really identifying the eyes and the nose and the heartbeat of who is sitting at the keyboard, who's on the phone with us, and what do they care about. And so that required doing what we would consider traditional MDM sorts of activities: match, merge, survivorship, golden copy. But for us, it's about identifying the roles all of these people are playing on financial accounts. So we're still, I would say, early in this journey, but we do have some internal users, you know, and it's really helped us get a deeper understanding of the universe of people interacting with the firm.
Fantastic. Now, we kind of touched on it earlier, but I know when we talk about new solutions and platforms, oftentimes there's a challenge of employee data literacy. You can have a platform, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be used to its full potential. So was that the case for you? Was there any challenge around data literacy? If so, how have you been overcoming it?
Yeah, I think this was another case where we have to drop the data. We had to drop the data management jargon, you know, going around and selling people a single source of truth or mastered, you know, client record that doesn't mean anything to them.
Yeah.
Right. So we really had to work on examples and actually draw from the data itself examples of, you know, I'll just throw in my own name, right? Like, we have Laura Hahn. How many accounts does Laura Hahn have with us? Look at all the things that she's doing and actually illustrate. Previously, we only knew this about Laura. After using this platform, look at the insights we have about Laura, to show them maybe opportunities they were missing by not using the information. So it just rinse and repeat, right? Example after example, befores and afters. Really helped us explain it to them. And then also, again, understanding what they're trying to do. Because if just matching Laura doesn't change how any of them do their jobs, it didn't matter. So you have to identify whose day-to-day job would actually change if they knew this information. Who would do that job differently? Who would make a better sale or cross-sell? Who would change the marketing material they send? You have to find those people, because that's where the value is actually tucked away.
Absolutely. I love that. The kind of two key points that I've taken away from that is actually having the key people understand the power that is quite literally at their fingertips in order to be used, but then also making sure that those are the right things that you want them to be able to have access to, in a sense of, is it actually helpful? And I think sometimes having those simple questions is sometimes the most interesting and insightful as it can be, is, does this actually help you? Because it's great to have these wonderful fancy dashboards and platforms, but at the end of the day, if they don't get used or they don't help the business, is it as great as it can look? Which is absolutely fantastic. Now, if you could give, I always like to think that there's the third person on our podcast as the token audience member. Now, if you could give them a piece of advice, looking to set up something similar in their organization, what would you say?
Well, you really have to figure out the why you want to do it. That's specific to your organization. And just as a, you know, I mentioned this a couple of times, but especially if you're at the beginning of the journey, I think you have to be careful of borrowing another company's why. You have to be careful of pulling out of a textbook how this is supposed to go. And you really have to be willing to start with the company's strategy and the company's initiatives and map those to data capabilities, and be willing for that to look different than any other company you know about. We can all share ideas with each other, but one trap I think we fall in sometimes is, you know, somebody else is doing this, so that must mean I should do it too. And I just think that that's a bit of a pitfall. If you are willing to have the courage to define this journey your own way in your own company that is totally tailored to the service of your organization, that is the pathway to success.
Absolutely. I love that idea as well, that it's not a copy paste exercise. It's a take whatever. So if you're listening to this podcast or another piece of content, take that user case, learn from it, but then apply it to your own organization appropriately. It's not going to be a copy paste exercise, because there's going to be nuances and differences that, no two companies are the same. I think that's a really great takeaway. So I'm looking at my clock in front of me, and I know I'm going to need to start winding down this conversation, even though I'm adamant we could go for hours here. So looking to the future, what sorts of innovation are you keeping your eyes on at the moment, and where do you think you're going to be going in the next 6 to 12 months?
In the data space specifically?
Yeah.
Well, the listeners to the podcast may know we're approaching an integration with Charles Schwab. So that has really dominated our plans and our landscape. So I think doing an integration of two companies of this size into really just a highly competitive financial firm, that integration process is going to require innovation to be successful, especially around data, because there's a massive amount of information to integrate successfully. And anybody who's done a merger knows that not taking care of the data will haunt you for many years in an integration. So how do we bring our data together, and how do we bring the best of our data capabilities from TDA and Schwab together? We'll be working through questions like that. And then how do we support the client experience throughout? And data, knowing information about both sets of clients is going to be critical to manage the client experience throughout. So if I think about where do we need to innovate, and which of those very tailored business problems, right, does data need to focus on? It's what data needs to be available to whom as we go through a tremendous amount of transformation. And so that's really going to be our focus in the next 6 to 12 months.
Fantastic. I just love that somehow we've managed to have this whole theme throughout the entire discussion about that collaboration. And I think, as you say, with that merger, collaboration is definitely going to be key. So my last question to you today, Laura, is for the listeners that have joined us for this podcast, what would you say are your 3 most important takeaways from this conversation about data culture and data management?
Yeah, I think that's the top 3 things that I still remind myself. Number 1 is to cater to your organization, not others, right? Or a textbook, right? Cater to your organization. Number 2, make it relatable. Translate our language into the language of the business. Translate it into terms they understand. We've done that a lot, and it's really helped us. And then 3rd, solve problems. And specifically what I mean by that is when we say move the needle, right? Find a needle you can move, right? Because that will help demonstrate to people that you're willing to roll up your sleeves and dig into their issues and help them move that needle. That goes a long way towards building confidence with other teams when they see you really getting in there and meaning what you say. When you commit to solving problems, you're showing evidence that you're willing to do it.
Absolutely. And what a great note to finish this episode on. Laura, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I love podcasts. I love this medium. So you're helping me accomplish some of my bucket list here too by being on one. So thank
wonderful.
You so much for doing this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, Laura did a fantastic job of summarizing the key takeaways from this podcast. But for me, the real message that I've received is just about communication. If you're able to communicate in an effective way to your executive board and to the wider business, there's nothing stopping you when it comes to data culture and data management. As always, make sure you are subscribed to the Business of Data platform and following us on socials as well, so that you're first in line for our insights and content. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you real soon.